Lost in the wilderness, a ghostly child. I had been wandering aimlessly in the snowy forest for what felt like hours. The blizzard had come out of nowhere, and I had quickly become disoriented. I had lost my compass and my phone had died, leaving me with no way to call for help. As I trudged through the knee-deep snow, I suddenly heard a soft crying coming from somewhere nearby. I followed the sound and soon came upon a small figure huddled against a tree. It was a child, no more than 4 or 5 years old. I was relieved to have found someone, but as I got closer, my relief turned to horror. The child didn't move or speak, just stared out of empty eyes. I reached out to touch the child's shoulder, but as soon as my fingers made contact, the child let out a blood-curdling scream and disappeared before my eyes. I was left standing there, alone in the snowy wilderness, my heart racing and my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just encountered something not of this world. The blizzard raged on, but I didn't care. I had to get as far away from that spot as possible. I started running, not looking back, not stopping until I was out of the forest. But even as I made my way back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that the child was still out there, watching me with those empty eyes. And I knew that I would never be the same again. I finally made it back to my cabin, completely exhausted and still in shock from what had happened in the forest. I immediately tried to call for help, but the phone lines were down due to the storm. I was completely cut off from the outside world. I tried to make sense of what had happened, but the memory of the child's empty eyes haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered something not of this world. I tried to sleep, but I was too terrified to close my eyes. The next morning, I decided to take a walk in the surrounding area, hoping to find some answers. I found a small, abandoned village that seemed to have been deserted for decades. The houses were in ruins and the streets were covered in snow. But something about the village felt familiar. As I walked through the village, I came upon a small house that seemed to be in better condition than the others. Inside, I found a diary that had been hidden beneath the floorboards. The diary belonged to a woman who had lived in the village with her family. As I read through the pages, I discovered that the woman's daughter had gone missing in the forest during a blizzard, just like the child I had encountered. The woman had searched for her daughter for weeks, but she had never been found. The diary also contained strange and terrifying descriptions of otherworldly creatures that the woman believed were responsible for her daughter's disappearance. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The child I had seen in the forest was the missing daughter, and she had been taken by something not of this world. I knew that I had to leave the village and never come back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the child was still out there, watching me with those empty eyes. And I knew that I would never be the same again. I quickly packed my things and left the cabin, determined to find a way out of the forest and back to civilization. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the child with empty eyes following me. As the day went on, the blizzard worsened, making it even harder to see my way. I knew I had to find shelter before nightfall, but every cabin and shelter I came across was abandoned and in ruins. Just as the sun began to set, I stumbled upon an old cabin that seemed to be in better condition than the others. I tried the door, and to my relief, it was unlocked. I quickly went inside and shut the door behind me, feeling a sense of safety for the first time since I had encountered the child. But as I looked around the cabin, my relief quickly turned to terror. The walls were covered in strange markings and symbols that I couldn't comprehend. And in the corner of the room, there was a small altar with the remains of a small animal on it. Suddenly, I heard a soft crying coming from outside. I froze, knowing that it was the child. I knew I had to leave the cabin, but I couldn't make myself move. The crying grew louder and closer, until it was right outside the door. I knew that the child was coming for me. I could feel its presence on the other side of the door. I could feel its emptiness and its hunger. And then, the door began to open, and I knew that my fate was sealed. I never saw the child again, but I knew it was still out there, watching me with empty eyes, waiting for its next victim. And I knew that I would never be the same again. I knew I had to get out of that cabin as soon as possible. I quickly grabbed my things and made my way out of the door, but as soon as I stepped outside, I saw it. The child was standing in front of me, its empty eyes staring straight at me. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in terror as the child slowly walked towards me. It reached out its hand, and I knew that it was going to take me just like it had taken the woman's daughter from the diary. But then something unexpected happened. The child's hand touched my forehead, and I felt a sudden warmth spread through my body. The emptiness in the child's eyes was replaced by a deep sadness, and it whispered something in a language I didn't understand. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the child was gone. I was alone in the forest once again, but this time, I felt different. I felt a sense of understanding and compassion that I had never felt before. I realized that the child was not a monster, but a lost and lonely being that had been taken by something not of this world. And I knew that it was my duty to help it find its way back. I set out into the forest once again, determined to find the child and bring it home. The blizzard raged on, but I didn't care. I knew that I was on a mission to save the child and to finally find peace for myself. And as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that the child was with me, watching over me with a newfound sense of hope in its eyes. And I knew that I would never be the same again. As I continued to explore the cabin, I found a photo of the woman and her family. I was shocked to see that I was in the photo, as a young boy, standing next to the woman and her daughter. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of this new revelation. I realized that the child I had encountered in the forest was not a ghost or an otherworldly being, but a manifestation of my own guilt and trauma. I had been the one who had led the woman's daughter into the forest during that fateful blizzard, and her disappearance was my fault. I had been haunted by this guilt for decades, and my mind had created this childlike figure as a way to cope with my trauma. I knew that I had to face my past and take responsibility for my actions. I left the cabin, and made my way back to the village to find the woman and apologize for my role in her daughter's disappearance. As I walked through the village, the blizzard began to subside, and the sun emerged from behind the clouds. I knew that this was a sign that I was on the right path and that I could finally find closure and peace. I may never be the same again, but I knew that I could finally move on from my past and make amends for my actions. And as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of gratitude for the child who had helped me to see the truth and to find my way back to the light. Covered in strange symbols and markings, as if they had been etched into the wood by a madman. I realized too late that this was not a cabin, but a trap set by the otherworldly creatures that the woman in the diary had warned about. I heard a scratching at the door and knew that they had found me. I was trapped, alone and defenseless in this haunted cabin in the middle of the snowy wilderness. The creatures broke down the door, and I was dragged out into the snow, never to be seen again. My fate remains a mystery to this day, and my final moments were spent in utter terror and despair, consumed by the darkness of the unknown.